Good afternoon, everyone. We are the Group 5. Today, we are going to report about ecological transition and population dynamics. What is ecological transition?
Ecological transition is a technical term in ecology that refers to either an ecological transition zone known to the layman as the fringe, or a move to a different ecosystem, BOSEM, to apply the idea of moving towards sustainable world.
It is a concept that aims to put in place a new social and economic model in order to respond intelligently to ecological challenges or rethink the way we live together on a territory. Work and produce in order to reduce our environmental impact. In the long term, it will enable us people to adopt a sustainable development approach by favoring renewable energies, modifying our consumption behavior, and limiting waste. It aims also to provide an economic and social response to the environmental challenges facing our planet.
In line with the ecological transition, there is the word or term ecotone. An ecotone is a zone that serves as a transition or boundary between two ecosystems. A marshy area between a river and its riverbank is a common example. Ecotones are extremely important to the ecology because the area represents a transition between two ecosystems or biomes. It's only natural that it has a diverse range of fauna and flora because it's influenced by both ecosystems. What are the importance of an ecotone? The importance of ecotone is they have a wider selection of creatures. Second, they also provide a nice nesting spot for animals looking for a place to lay their eggs or nourishment. Because of the greater genetic diversity available, they act as a conduit for gene flow from one population to another. Third, they can serve as buffer zones, protecting the ecosystems along the border from harm. A wetland, for example, can absorb pollutants and keep them from entering the river. And lastly, ecotones are also sensitive indication of climate change on a global scale. Climate change is assumed to be causing a shift in ecosystem boundaries. As a result, ecotones are now being studied more closely by scientists and environmentalists. Edge effect. Edge effects refers to the changes in population or community structures that occur at the boundary of two habitats. Generally, there is a greater number of species found in these regions or ecotones, and this is called the edge effect. The species found here are called edge species. The greater number of landscape elements, vegetation complicity, and mixed ecosystem characteristics result in greater density and biodiversity along the ecozones. The new array of species living along edges are unique and are called edge species. Amphibians are the classic edge species of floodplain ecotones. They are able to perform most of their daily activities along these edges. So, we are now presenting the importance of edges. First, high biodiversity and highly sensitive zones. Ecotones and edges are unique because of the conditions they host. Their ability to support so many different organisms make them highly sensitive areas of biodiversity. These zones are harsh and sensitive. Even small changes in their characteristics can be potentially disastrous for the organisms living there. Second, human interest. Human, Humans have affected ecotones and edges in their quest to modify these zones for their benefit. Edges also host advantageous conditions for humans. Along the riverland ecotone, the land is extremely fertile. It also has a ready water source in close proximity. These conditions are excellent for the development of agricultural land. Or interference in interior ecosystems tend to create ecotones. In some cases, When a road is built through a forest, the path of the road represents a transition from the two forest ecosystems or either side. This artificial ecotone is also tension zone for the interior organisms. For example, these include edges, play detrimental role in seed dispersal of the nearby vegetation species. Our interference has added another dimension to an already complicated condition in ecotones. Nowhere in nature has excessive human involvement been beneficial for life. This same is the case for ecotones. Understanding ecotone dynamics helps us understand how we are affecting them. This helps us plan our land use better in the future. Lastly, is the conservation and restoration. Ecotones and edges are an active area of research for conservation. If we can conserve and restore ecotones, we are effectively conserving a greater amount of biodiversity in nature. This was recognized when the Convention was signed by 172 countries, vowing to protect the wetlands of the world. Wetlands form one of the greatest ecotones regions in the world. Today, so much biodiversity is being conserved and protected because of the decisions taken in that convention. Ecotones and edges remain a huge area of research for future ecologists because its development, maintenance, and restoration is extremely important to support the huge biodiversity it hosts, as well as sustains many economic activities. The first to theorize the concept of ecological transition in 2005 was the British teacher Rob Hopkins. Rob Hopkins is an activist and writer on environmental issues based on Totnes Island, England rather. He is best known as the founder and figurehead of the transition movement, which he initiated in 2005. Hopkins has written 6 books on environmentalism and activism. Based on experiments pursuing autonomy and local resilience, Rob Hopkins developed a set of principles and practices that he exposed in his book The Transition Handbook from Oil Dependency to Local Resilience, published in 2008.
What does it mean to be in transition? It's a movement that's much bigger than a simple concept. The transition entails putting the concept of sustainable development into practice. Alternatives are being created to ensure our society's resilience in the face of an ecological crisis, climate change, and the loss of natural resources. Starting in cities that wanted to address climate change and peak oil, the idea of an ecological transition gradually expanded to other economic and social sectors. Energy transition or energy efficiency, preference for renewable energies, industrial transition, or local production of recyclable items in a circular economy concept, and agri-food transition are all part of the ecological transition or replacement of an industrial agricultural by an organic one. The transition principles have had an impact on a wide range of industries. In terms of city planning, the transformation has entailed urban densification, the creation of green areas, energy efficiency, and other measures. Ecomobility has emerged as the primary mode of transportation. Car sharing, electric buses, and public bicycles. Financial institutions and fiscal incentives, as well as other forms of education based on cooperation and complementarity, are becoming a reality. Citizen participation is critical to the success of these initiatives because of their bottom-up approach. Quick facts. The concept of ecological transition was given by John W. Bennett on the year 1976. John W. Bennett, a PhD, is the founder and first chair of the Department of Anthropology in Arts and Sciences. He was one of the original members of a group that formed the separate Department of Anthropology in 1967 and was appointed chair that year. He served in that capacity for 20 years. In 1987, he became Distinguished Anthropologist in Residence. Bennett died on February 1, 2005 at Alexian Brothers Lansdowne Village in St. Louis, and he was 89 years old.
What is population dynamics? A population dynamic is a group of individual organisms of the same species that live in the same place. The term population dynamics describes how a population's population size fluctuates over time. Biologists are interested in themes such as endangered species protection, such as the Florida panther, and fish and wildlife management. Thus, they investigate the elements that influence population dynamics. Furthermore, basic knowledge of the factors that influence population dynamics can forecast future human population growth patterns. Population dynamics is the study of how and why populations change in Population dynamics is the study of how and why populations change in size and structure over time. Population dynamics are influenced by rates of reproduction, death, and migration. The number of creatures that have a negative impact on the species of interest, such as competitors, predators, and diseases, may, for example, control the abundance of a certain species. Short and long-term variations in population quantity and age composition, as well as the biological and environmental mechanisms that drive those changes, are studied in this field of biology. Birth and death rates, as well as immigration and movement patterns, are studied in population dynamics. How do biologists characterize populations? Unstructured and structured populations are the two basic categories of populations identified by biologists. All individuals in an unstructured population are exposed to the same broad ecological stresses. All individuals in the population have nearly the same growth, reproduction, and mortality rates. An unorganized population can be seen in a bacterial colony. On the other hand, individuals in organized populations can differ in ways that make some people more vulnerable to mortality or more likely to reproduce than others. Many insects, sea turtles, trees, and fish are examples of organized populations. Younger and people have a substantially greater mortality rate in these situations. Furthermore, reproduction is frequently postponed until an individual is older. How does resource abundance affect population dynamics? Population abundance evolves determined by the abundance of environmental resources such as food, water, and space. Populations grow enormously in the presence of infinite resources. The difference between the population's birth and death rates determines the rate of increase. Natural populations rarely grow. Sorry. Natural populations rarely grow exponentially over long periods because resources became scarce when population density is high. When resources become scarce, population exhibit a pattern of expansion known as logistic growth. When the number of people in a population is plotted over time, it forms a sigmoidal or S-shaped curve. When a new environment with sufficient resources is formed, certain species have features that expand quickly. For example, a new clearing in a forest. Other species are better suited to living in areas with fierce competition for scarce resources. How does variability in environmental conditions affect population dynamics? For ecosystems with limited resources, a primary assumption of the logistic population growth model is that environmental conditions remain constant. Environmental conditions in nature can change dramatically over time, and the abundance of people in a population may likewise fluctuate. Populations that change a lot or have a low abundance are particularly vulnerable to extinction. How do physical and biological factors regulate population dynamics? Some organisms require the presence of Symbionts are other species with whom they live nearby. Some species population abundance is influenced by physical variables such as water availability and temperature. Biological factors control some populations, while physical forces influence others, and most populations are affected by biological and physical elements.
The purpose of information presented here is to help landowners understand why animal numbers may vary or change. No population is ever the same from one year to the next, and wildlife must adjust to this change. For example, wild-tailed deer population rose from 260,000 to 350,000 during 1970 to over 1 million in 2009. Landowners, natural resource managers, and wildlife experts use various tools to manage wildlife on private land. Habitats and animal space requirements determine the carrying capacity for wildlife. When a population is at or near the maximum number the environment can support, birth rates are low and death rates are high. These concepts are important for landowners to understand when making decisions affecting wildlife on their land. How many offsprings come wildlife have? Bobwhite quail are genetically programmed to lay an average of 14 eggs per clutch. Cottontail rabbits have a much higher biotic potential or intrinsic rate of population increase than bats because they can add more members to their population over the same period. All wildlife experience varying capabilities for growing in numbers, but they all experience environmental constraints or decimating factors. A lack of food, cover, or water limits a population. These constraints may take the form of predators, disease, hunting, trapping, weather, or a combination of these factors. Landowners who reduce the size of individual grain fields to reduce soil erosion could also increase the number of bobwhite quail or cottontail rabbit. Through, the, through an increase in the total length of width of hedge rows or field borders. Wildlife does not recognize legal boundaries as humans do. Instead, they move throughout areas according to the existence of natural or artificial boundaries. Animals tend to choose the best location where they can find food, cover, and water. Dispersion refers to the location or pattern of animals in space, whether horizontally or vertically. Density is perhaps the most frequently obtained measurement of wildlife population. Density is usually estimated from a count of animals on a portion of the total area. Suppose condition and workforce permit. All of the animals are observed and counted across the area. This is referred to as a census and is a more refined version of popular size. Wildlife population parameters. Population A Population age ratios are commonly used to compare changes in a single population between years or within the same year for different populations. Recent information suggests that age ratios may not affect actual changes in population. However, age pyramids can allow a private landowners to take a quick look at the age of young versus old animals in the population and dispel several myths concerning the stockpiling of wildlife. With short-lived species, example given, muskrats, quail, cottontail, rabbit, woodcock, mourning dove. The information is more readily obtained but will be helpful only into the following year. Age pyramids for small games show that a large percentage of the population never make it to age 3. It is challenging to increase small game bird population by stocking pens birds unless the habitat is present. Mortality factors. Mortality factors to the inherent loss of individuals from a population through death. Mortality is difficult to measure because carcasses are hard to locate. Wildlife species with a high reproductive potential tend to have low survivorship and high mortality at younger age. Animals with low reproductive potential, such as wild-tailed deer, have a high survivorship of young. During mild winters, many quails survive only to fall prey to a host of predators because of finite amounts of escape cover. The overall effect is that the habitat from year to year supports approximately the same number of quail. In, com- in compensatory mortality, hunting and trapping serve to replace the natural mortality factors. Operating on a population, man must regulate must, man must regulate the removal of animals because all population of harvest level at which mortality factors are no longer compensatory but additive. Muskrats are perfect example. When large muskrats are removed by trapping, the population responds in these ways. Additive mortality can be detrimental and lead to population decline. Regulated sport hunting has never resulted in an endangered or threatened species list. What keeps like what keeps wildlife population in check? On a particular tract of land, there will be a unique array of vegetative, cover types, and landforms that provide habitat for some wildlife species. The spatial arrangement and habitat quality will ultimately determine how many members of a species can exist on the property. Knowing in advance how a particular wildlife species will likely respond to habitat alternation is one of the keys to successful wildlife management. According to Barbara Ward, we have forgotten how to be good guests, how to walk lightly on the earth as its other creatures do.
So this is our reference for this reporting, and we thank you as we end our presentation.